The morning briefing at Al Udeid Air Base started like any other, until Captain Reyna Viper Castellanos walked into the operations center carrying a Barrett M82A1 sniper rifle case. The room fell silent. 23 pilots, all men, turned to stare at the woman who just requested permission to mount a .50 caliber rifle in her A-10 Thunderbolt II. The silence stretched uncomfortably long before someone snorted with laughter. "You planning to poke holes in buildings from 30,000 feet, Viper?" Major Bradley Tex Morrison called out, his Texas drawl dripping with condescension. The room erupted in chuckles. "Last I checked, we use Hellfire missiles for that." Reyna didn't flinch. Her dark eyes remained fixed on Colonel James Hawk Patterson, the wing commander who'd been studying her personnel file for the past 10 minutes. The file that showed her graduating second in her flight class, her flawless combat record in Afghanistan, and the classified incident that had earned her the call sign Viper, though most assumed it was because she was a woman in a man's world who had to strike to survive. "Ma'am," she said quietly, her voice carrying the slight accent of her New Mexico upbringing, "I'm not talking about air-to-ground engagement. I'm talking about air-to-air." The laughter died instantly. "Air-to-air with a rifle," Captain Bulldog Henderson shook his head. "That's impossible, the physics alone." "The physics work fine if you know what you're doing," Reyna interrupted, her tone matter-of-fact. "I've run the calculations. Muzzle velocity, trajectory compensation for aircraft speed differential, lead time for moving targets. It's doable within a specific engagement envelope." Colonel Patterson finally looked up from the file. His weathered face gave nothing away, but his gray eyes held a calculating gleam. He'd seen something in those classified pages that the others hadn't, something that made him lean forward slightly. "Captain Castellanos," he said slowly, "are you telling me you want to shoot down enemy aircraft with a sniper rifle?" "No, sir," she replied. "I'm telling you I can." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Outside, the desert wind whistled across the tarmac where rows of A-10s sat like sleeping predators. Somewhere in the distance, an F-16 was taking off, its engines screaming defiance at gravity. Patterson closed the file with deliberate precision. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, but every man in that room heard him clearly. "Give her the black Talon." The morning sun blazed mercilessly over the Qatari desert as Reyna Castellanos walked toward her aircraft, the Barrett case slung across her shoulder like a dark promise. Behind her, the briefing room had exploded into heated discussions about regulations, precedent, and impossibility. But Colonel Patterson's word was law, and somehow, inexplicably, he just authorized the most unconventional weapons modification in modern air combat history. The A-10 Thunderbolt II waiting on the tarmac was aircraft number 780691, call sign Warthog 7. She was a veteran bird, her titanium bathtub scarred by flak and small arms fire from 3 deployment cycles. The ground crew had been working on her since dawn, welding mounting brackets for the Barrett rifle system that Reyna had designed during sleepless nights in her quarters. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, the crew chief, looked up as Reyna approached. Santos was one of the few people on base who didn't treat her differently because of her gender. In the sergeant's world, anyone who could keep an A-10 flying and fighting earned respect, regardless of what chromosomes they carried. "Ma'am, I've got to ask," Santos said, wiping grease from her hands with a red rag. "What exactly are you planning to do with this thing?" She gestured toward the rifle mount protruding from the aircraft's nose, just below the GAU-8 Avenger cannon. Reyna set down the case and opened it, revealing the massive Barrett rifle nestled in custom foam. The weapon was a work of art, matte black finish, bipod removed, scope mounts modified for aircraft integration. She'd spent 6 months planning this modification, running computer simulations, studying ballistics tables until her eyes burned. "Something that's never been done before, Sergeant," she replied, running her hand along the rifle's barrel. "Something they say is impossible." "Well, ma'am," Santos grinned, "impossible is just another word for Tuesday around here." As they worked to secure the rifle and its mount, word spread across the base like wildfire. Pilots, ground crew, intelligence officers, even the base commander's staff, everyone found reasons to walk past Warthog 7. Some watched with curiosity, others with skepticism, and a few with barely concealed hostility. Captain Morrison appeared beside the aircraft, his arms crossed and his jaw set in disapproval. "This is insane, Viper. You're going to get yourself killed and probably take some good pilots down with you when they have to come rescue your ass." Reyna continued working, adjusting the rifle's position with mechanical precision. "Your concern is noted, Tex." "My concern," Morrison's voice rose. "My concern is that you're treating air combat like some kind of video game. This isn't Call of Duty, sweetheart. Out there people die." The endearment hit like a slap, but Reyna's hands never stopped moving. She'd heard variations of this speech for 8 years, ever since flight school. Every time she'd proven herself, someone had moved the goalposts. Every success had been attributed to luck, every failure magnified tenfold. The desert wind carried the scent of jet fuel and heated metal across the tarmac. In the distance, thunder rumbled not from storms, but from F-22 Raptors practicing combat air patrol patterns. The sound was a constant reminder that somewhere beyond the horizon, real threats waited. Intelligence reports spoke of advanced enemy fighters probing Allied airspace, testing defenses, looking for weaknesses. Colonel Patterson materialized beside them as if conjured from the heat shimmer. His presence had a way of making conversations die abrupt deaths. He studied the rifle mount for a long moment, then looked at Reyna with those calculating gray eyes. "Captain," he said quietly, "walk with me." They moved away from the aircraft, out of earshot of the curious crowd. Patterson's boots crunched on the gravel as they walked toward the edge of the tarmac, where the base perimeter stretched into empty desert. "I read about Kandahar," he said without preamble. Reyna's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Kandahar was classified, buried deep in files that most people would never see. It was also the reason she'd earned her call sign, though the official story was very different from the truth. "Sir, 18 enemy fighters," Patterson continued, his voice steady. "Your wingman shot down you alone against odds that should have been suicide, but instead of running, you did something extraordinary." The desert stretched endlessly before them, a landscape of heat and silence broken only by the distant activity of the air base. Reyna remembered another desert, another time when the sky had been full of death and her options had narrowed to a single, desperate choice. "What I did at Kandahar won't work twice, sir. They'll be expecting conventional tactics now." Patterson stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "That's exactly why this might work. They'll never expect a rifle." The afternoon sun hammered down on Al Udeid Air Base with the relentless intensity that made Qatar feel like the surface of an alien world. In the operations center, Intelligence Officer Captain Lisa, Prophet, Chen was briefing the day's mission parameters to a room full of skeptical pilots. The target was a series of suspected weapons facilities in northern Syria, deep in contested airspace, where enemy fighters had been increasingly active. AWACS reports indicate at least 6 hostile aircraft in the area, Prophet said, her laser pointer dancing across satellite imagery displayed on the wall-mounted screens. Su-30 flankers, possibly upgraded variants with advanced avionics. They've been shadowing our reconnaissance flights, probing our response times. Major Morrison raised his hand. "Rules of engagement. Standard row applies. You are cleared to engage any aircraft showing hostile intent within the designated combat zone." Prophet's eyes found Reyna in the back of the room. "All aircraft will maintain standard weapons loadouts except Warthog 7, which has been authorized for experimental payload configuration." The room buzzed with murmured conversations. Everyone knew about the rifle by now, but hearing it acknowledged in an official briefing made it real in a way that hangar gossip couldn't. Colonel Patterson stepped forward. "Gentlemen, and Captain Castellanos, you're about to witness something unprecedented. I want you to understand that what happens today may change how we think about air combat fundamentals." "Sir," Captain Bulldog Henderson spoke up, "with all due respect, isn't this putting the entire mission at risk for the sake of an untested theory?" The question hung in the air like smoke from burning jet fuel. Every pilot in the room was thinking the same thing, but Henderson had the rank and the reputation to voice it publicly. He was a 15-year veteran with 67 combat missions, and his opinion carried weight. Patterson's response was measured, deliberate. "Captain Henderson, calculated risks are what separate great warriors from good technicians. Today, we calculate differently." As the briefing concluded and pilots filed out to their aircraft, Raina felt the weight of 23 pairs of eyes on her. Some held curiosity, others concern, and a few barely concealed contempt. She'd been carrying that weight for years, but today felt different. Today, the weight might finally mean something. The walk to Warthog 7 felt longer than usual. Each step took her closer to either vindication or humiliation, and the difference between the two might be measured in milliseconds and millimeters. The Barrett rifle waited in its mount, its presence both reassuring and terrifying. Staff Sergeant Santos was performing final checks when Raina arrived. "She's ready, ma'am," the crew chief reported. "Rifle system shows green across the board. Computer interface is online. Ballistics calculations are loaded into the targeting system." "Weather?" Raina asked, beginning her pre-flight inspection. "Clear skies, winds light and variable. Visibility unlimited." Santos paused. "Ma'am, for what it's worth, I think you're either crazy brave or brave crazy. Either way, I'm proud to crew your bird." The sentiment was unexpected, and it hit Raina harder than any criticism had. She nodded once, not trusting her voice, and continued her inspection. Every bolt, every connection, every system had to be perfect. In air combat, there were no participation trophies. 20 minutes later, she was strapped into the cockpit, engines spooling up, radio crackling with the familiar voices of flight control and her wingmen. The mission was simple in concept: fly into hostile territory, destroy the targets, return home alive. The execution, however, was where simple became complex, and complex became deadly. "Warthog 7, you are cleared for takeoff." The tower controller's voice was professionally neutral, but Raina could hear the underlying tension. Everyone knew this mission was different. The A-10's engines roared to life with their characteristic whine, and Raina felt the familiar surge of anticipation that came with strapping 30,000 pounds of titanium and firepower to her back. But today, something else rode with her: a modified Barrett M82 A1 rifle that represented either the future of air combat or the end of her career. As Warthog 7 rolled down the runway and lifted into the crystalline desert sky, the sun caught the aircraft's desert camouflage and turned it into something that looked almost beautiful, almost peaceful. But beauty and peace were luxuries that didn't exist where they were going. The flight to the target area took 47 minutes, a journey across landscapes that shifted from desert to mountain to valley like pages in a geography textbook written in sand and stone. Raina flew in loose formation with 3 other A-10s, their call signs Warthog 2 through 4. Each aircraft carried a standard loadout of Maverick missiles and 30 cannon rounds, weapons that had been proven in countless engagements. Only Warthog 7 carried something different. "Warthog flight, this is AWACS Overwatch." The voice from the E-3 Sentry aircraft crackled through their headsets. "We're showing multiple contacts bearing 270, range 60 miles and closing. Count 6 hostiles, designated Bandit 1 through Bandit 6. Major Morrison's voice cut through the radio chatter. Warthog lead to flight maintain formation. We stick to the mission. But Reyna was studying her tactical display, watching the 6 radar contacts converging on their position with the methodical precision of wolves surrounding prey. The enemy fighters were flying in a coordinated pattern, using terrain masking and electronic countermeasures to complicate targeting solutions. Overwatch Warthog 7, she transmitted. Request tactical update on bandit capabilities. Warthog 7, bandits appear to be Su-30 flankers with upgraded radar and missile systems. Recommend extreme caution. These aren't export variants, they're frontline fighters with experienced pilots. The information sent a chill through the formation. Su-30s were formidable opponents, fast and maneuverable with beyond visual range missile capabilities. In a traditional engagement, A-10s would rely on ground-based air defenses or fighter escorts to deal with such threats. Today, they were operating without that umbrella. Warthog 7, Warthog lead, Morrison's voice carried an edge of concern. Stay tight on my wing. When the shooting starts, we're going to need every gun we can get. Reyna keyed her mic. Copy lead, staying tight. But her eyes kept drifting to the rifle mounted below her aircraft's nose. The Barrett's targeting system was integrated with her helmet-mounted display, showing wind speed, target range, and ballistic solutions in real time. It was a marvel of engineering that had never been tested in combat. The target area appeared ahead, a cluster of concrete buildings nestled in a valley surrounded by rocky hills. Intelligence suggested these structures housed weapons manufacturing facilities, but from the air, they looked like any other industrial complex in the region. Warthog Flight, this is Overwatch. The AWACS controller's voice carried new urgency. Bandits have changed course. They're moving to intercept your egress route. Recommend expedited target engagement. Morrison's response was immediate. Roger, Overwatch, Warthog Flight, let's make this fast and clean. Target assignments as briefed. Weapons free. The 4 A-10s rolled into their attack runs with practiced precision. Maverick missiles streaked toward their targets, followed by long bursts from GAU-8 cannons that sounded like giant zippers tearing through the sky. Secondary explosions bloomed orange and black as ammunition stores detonated. Good hits, Morrison called. Warthog Flight, form up for egress. But as they climbed away from the target area, the tactical situation changed dramatically. The 6 Su-30s had positioned themselves between the A-10s and their return route, and they were closing fast. Warthog Flight, break formation. Morrison's voice cracked with tension. Bandits inbound, 12 o'clock high. The sky erupted into chaos as air-to-air missiles streaked between the aircraft like deadly lightning bolts. Reyna threw Warthog 7 into a sharp right bank, pulling G-forces that made her vision gray at the edges. Behind her, she could hear the distinctive whine of a Su-30 engines as one of the enemy fighters committed to pursuit. This was the moment she'd trained for, planned for, dreamed about through countless sleepless nights. The Barrett rifle's targeting system locked onto the pursuing flanker, and for the first time in aviation history, an A-10 pilot prepared to engage an enemy fighter with a sniper rifle. The pursuing Su-30 closed distance with predatory patience, its pilot clearly confident in his aircraft's superior speed and maneuverability. At 35,000 feet, the flanker represented everything the A-10 was not: sleek, fast, designed for air superiority. Its pilot had every reason to expect an easy kill. Reyna watched the range counter on her heads-up display tick down. 800 meters, 750, 700. The Barrett's ballistic computer was calculating dozens of variables: aircraft speeds, wind vectors, bullet drop, lead angles. At these speeds and distances, the margin for error was measured in fractions of degrees. Warthog 7, you've got company. Morrison's voice cut through the radio static. Break left, break left. Instead, Reyna pulled Warthog 7 into a climbing turn that seemed to defy the A-10's reputation for sluggish performance. The maneuver brought her nose on to the pursuing flanker, creating a head-to-head engagement geometry that no fighter pilot expected from a ground attack aircraft. The Su-30 pilot, call sign unknown but undoubtedly experienced, recognized the threat immediately. His aircraft began evasive maneuvers, barrel rolls, split-S turns, random jinks designed to spoil any targeting solution. But the Barrett's targeting system had been programmed for exactly this scenario. At 600 meters, Reyna squeezed the trigger. The .50 caliber bullet left the Barrett's muzzle at 2,800 feet per second, following a ballistic arc that the targeting computer had calculated to intersect with the Su-30 flight path. The round covered the distance in less than a second, too fast for human reflexes to track, too small for radar to detect. It struck the flanker's left engine intake with the force of a small artillery shell. The effect was catastrophic. The bullet's kinetic energy, combined with the Su-30 forward velocity, created a hydrostatic shock that propagated through the engine's compressor blades. Metal fragments shredded the turbine, and the engine disintegrated in a cascade of secondary failures. The flanker rolled hard to the right, trailing flame and debris. Its pilot fought for control, but physics had already won. At that altitude and speed, a single-engine flameout in a Su-30 was a death sentence. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered over the radio, "did she just?" The pilot ejected at 2,000 feet, his parachute blossoming like a white flower against the brown landscape below. The Su-30 impacted the ground in a fireball that could be seen for miles. But there were still 5 enemy fighters in the sky, and they had just witnessed something that changed everything they thought they knew about air combat. All bandits," an accented voice crackled through the radio frequencies, speaking in English with the cold professionalism of a veteran pilot. "The Warthog has long-range precision capability. Maintain distance, use missiles only." The remaining Su-30s immediately altered their tactics, climbing to higher altitudes and spreading out to present multiple threats from different vectors. Their pilots were adapting in real time, which marked them as elite aviators who understood that survival meant evolution. Reyna checked her tactical display. The other 3 A-10s were engaged in their own struggles, dodging missiles and trying to create separation distance. Major Morrison's aircraft had taken damage to its port engine, trailing smoke but still flying. The formation was scattered across 50 square miles of hostile sky. "Warthog 7, this is Overwatch." The AWACS controller's voice carried new respect. "Confirmed Splash 1 bandit, outstanding shooting." "Confirmed Splash 1, Reyna replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Barrett's system functioning as designed." She was already tracking the next target, Bandit 3, a flanker that was positioning for a missile shot on Morrison's damaged aircraft. The range was extreme, nearly 1,000 meters, but the ballistic computer indicated a viable solution if she could maintain heading for 12 more seconds. The Su-30 pilot was good, using a weaving attack pattern that made targeting difficult. But he was also predictable, following classic air-to-air tactics that assumed his opponent would respond with conventional weapons. He never considered that he might be in the crosshairs of a sniper rifle. Reyna fired again. This time, the bullet struck the flanker's canopy rail, spiderwebbing the transparency and creating an instant pressure differential. The pilot's ejection sequence triggered automatically as the aircraft's safety systems detected catastrophic structural failure. Another parachute blossomed. Another Su-30 became a crater in the desert. "2 down," Morrison's voice carried amazement and something else, the beginning of belief. "Viper, you magnificent bitch, you're actually doing it." The remaining 4 Su-30s had seen enough. They began withdrawing to safer distances, using their speed advantage to create separation while maintaining missile lock-on capabilities. Their pilots were recalculating, trying to understand how to fight an enemy that could kill them from distances they'd thought were safe. But Reyna wasn't finished. The Barrett had 20 rounds and she'd used only 2. The targeting system was learning, adapting to the specific characteristics of this engagement. Each shot would be more accurate than the last. The sky stretched endlessly blue above the chaos of combat, a canvas painted with contrails and punctuated by the brief orange flowers of explosions. Somewhere in that vastness, 6 pilots were flying aircraft worth hundreds of millions of dollars, each trying to kill the others with technologies that represented the pinnacle of human engineering. And in the middle of it all, a woman from New Mexico was rewriting the rules of air combat with a rifle. The tactical situation had shifted dramatically in the span of 3 minutes. What began as a routine ground attack mission had evolved into the most unusual air-to-air engagement in modern military history. The remaining 4 Su-30s maintained defensive formations at maximum missile range, their pilots clearly struggling to adapt to an opponent who had just invalidated centuries of air combat doctrine. Warthog Flight, this is Overwatch. The AWACS controller's voice carried new urgency. Additional bandits inbound from the north. Count 4 more contacts, estimated arrival time 6 minutes. Major Morrison's response was immediate. Roger, Overwatch. Warthog Flight, we need to wrap this up and get out of here. Viper, can you engage the remaining bandits? Reyna studied her tactical display. The 4 Su-30s had spread into a defensive wheel formation, using their superior speed to maintain separation while keeping her aircraft within missile engagement range. It was a classic tactic designed to force her into a defensive posture while they worked to achieve advantageous firing positions. But the Barrett rifle had changed the equation. At ranges where the flankers felt safe from conventional weapons, they were actually at optimal distance for precision rifle fire. Warthog lead, Warthog 7, she transmitted. I can engage, but I need you to keep them honest. Make them think about missiles so they don't have time to think about the rifle. Morrison's aircraft, despite its damaged engine, immediately began maneuvering toward the enemy formation. His actions drew the attention of 3 Su-30s, forcing them to divide their focus between multiple threats. That division of attention was exactly what Reyna needed. She selected Bandit 4, a flanker that was positioning for a high-angle attack on Morrison's wounded aircraft. The enemy pilot was executing a classic boom-and-zoom maneuver, trading altitude for speed in preparation for a missile launch. His flight path was predictable, following physics rather than random evasion patterns. The Barrett's targeting system calculated the intercept solution in milliseconds. Range, 1,200 meters. Relative velocity, Mach 1.8. Wind compensation, minimal at altitude. Target aspect, optimal for engine hit. Reyna fired her 3rd round. The bullet reached the Su-30 before the sound of the gunshot faded from her cockpit. It struck the aircraft's starboard engine exhaust nozzle, creating a pressure wave that propagated back through the turbine housing. The engine didn't explode, it simply ceased to exist, disintegrating into a cloud of metallic fragments that peppered the flanker's fuselage. This pilot was more skilled than the previous 2. Instead of ejecting, he fought for control, using differential thrust from his remaining engine to maintain level flight. For several seconds, it appeared he might succeed in bringing the aircraft under control. Then the damaged engine mount failed, and the entire power plant separated from the airframe. The Su-30 entered an unrecoverable flat spin, its pilot ejecting at the last possible moment. The aircraft impacted a rocky hillside with a sound like thunder rolling across the desert landscape. 3 down, Morrison's voice carried a note of awe. Viper, you're making believers out of all of us. But the celebration was premature. The remaining 3 Su-30s had regrouped, and were now approaching from different vectors, their pilots having finally adapted to the new threat paradigm. They weren't going to give her clean shots anymore. Warthog 7, brake right. The warning came from Captain Henderson in Warthog 4. Bandit 6 has missile lock. Reyna threw her aircraft into a sharp right turn, feeling the G-forces compress her into the ejection seat. Behind her, an R-77 air-to-air missile streaked through the space she'd occupied seconds earlier, its proximity fuse detonating harmlessly against empty sky. The engagement had become a deadly game of three-dimensional chess, with each side trying to anticipate the other's moves, while maintaining the split-second timing that separated survival from catastrophe. The A-10s used their superior low-speed maneuverability to create difficult targeting solutions, while the Su-30s relied on speed and standoff weapons to maintain their advantage. But Reyna had something neither side had accounted for: patience. While her wingmen engaged in frantic evasive maneuvers, she positioned Warthog 7 for a shot that would end the engagement decisively. The Barrett's targeting system had identified a pattern in the enemy formation, a brief moment every 40 seconds when all three remaining flankers aligned their flight paths to coordinate missile launches. She waited for that moment, her fingers steady on the trigger, her eyes tracking the tactical display with predatory focus. The other pilots were fighting the battle they knew. She was fighting the battle she'd invented. When the moment came, she fired 3 rounds in rapid succession. The first bullet struck Bandit 2's radar dome, destroying the aircraft's ability to track targets or guide missiles. Blinded but still flyable, the flanker immediately broke off to return to base. The second round hit Bandit 5's vertical stabilizer, severing hydraulic lines and making the aircraft difficult to control. This pilot also chose discretion over valor, turning away from the engagement. The third bullet found Bandit 6's cockpit. The pilot never knew what hit him. One moment he was lining up for another missile shot, the next he was facing eternity. The Su-30 continued flying on autopilot for nearly a minute before gravity finally claimed it. Silence settled over the radio frequencies like dust after an explosion. 4 A-10s and 1 surviving Su-30 shared the same piece of sky, but the fight was over. Everyone knew it, even if no one wanted to say it first. Finally, Major Morrison's voice cut through the quiet. Warthog flight form up for egress. Outstanding work, people, outstanding work. As they flew toward home, each pilot dealing with his own thoughts about what they'd just witnessed, none of them noticed that Colonel Patterson's voice was among the radio transmissions they'd monitored throughout the engagement. He'd been listening to everything. The return flight to Al Udeid Air Base passed in unusual quiet, each pilot absorbed in processing what they'd witnessed. The radio chatter that normally filled the airwaves during egress was replaced by a contemplative silence that spoke louder than any words could have. 4 A-10s flew in loose formation across the desert landscape, their shadows racing along the sand below like dark promises of things to come. In the lead aircraft, Major Morrison found himself stealing glances at Warthog 7, flying steady and straight on his right wing. The pilot inside that cockpit had just fundamentally changed air warfare, and the implications were staggering. Every air force in the world would want to understand what had happened today. Every pilot would need to reconsider what they thought they knew about air-to-air combat. Warthog flight, this is Al Udeid Tower. The familiar voice of the control tower brought them back to immediate reality. You are cleared for straighten approach, runway 27. Priority handling authorized. Priority handling meant the base commander wanted to debrief them immediately. It meant their mission had attracted attention at levels far above a typical ground attack sortie. It meant that what happened today wouldn't stay secret for long. As they descended toward the airfield, Reyna could see clusters of personnel gathered along the flight line. Ground crews, pilots from other squadrons, intelligence officers, even administrative staff who normally never ventured near operational aircraft. Word had spread through the base's informal communication network with the speed that only military gossip could achieve. The landing was smooth, routine, anticlimactic after the drama of the engagement. 4 aircraft touching down on familiar concrete, their pilots going through the mechanical procedures that ended every flight. But today felt different. Today felt like the end of one era and the beginning of another. Staff Sergeant Santos was waiting beside Warthog 7 when Reyna shut down the engines. The crew chief's expression was unreadable as she approached the aircraft, but her movements carried the careful precision of someone handling something precious. "Ma'am," Santos said as Reyna climbed down from the cockpit, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." Reyna removed her helmet and looked at the sergeant with tired eyes. The adrenaline was wearing off now, replaced by the bone-deep exhaustion that followed intense combat. "What do you need to know, Sergeant? Did you really shoot down 4 enemy fighters with that rifle?" The question hung in the desert air between them. Around the aircraft, a crowd was gathering: pilots, ground crew, officers, enlisted personnel. Everyone wanted to hear the answer, but nobody wanted to ask the question directly. Santos had the courage to voice what they were all thinking. "4 confirmed," Reyna replied quietly. "1 probable that broke off with damage." The crowd erupted. Cheers, applause, shouts of amazement and disbelief mixed together in a cacophony that echoed across the flight line. Someone started chanting, "Viper! Viper!" and others picked up the call until her call sign became a battle cry. But Reyna wasn't listening to the celebration. Her attention was focused on a figure approaching through the crowd: Colonel Patterson, walking with the measured stride of a man who had important business to conduct. His expression gave nothing away, but something in his posture suggested that the day's surprises were far from over. "Captain Castellanos," Patterson said when he reached her, his voice cutting through the crowd noise with practiced authority. "Outstanding work today, truly outstanding." "Thank you, sir," she replied, coming to attention despite her exhaustion. Patterson studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes holding secrets she couldn't read. "Captain, I need you to understand something. What happened today changes everything. Every military in the world is going to want to know how you did it. Every pilot is going to want to learn your techniques. Every engineer is going to want to study your rifle system." He paused, looking around at the gathered crowd before continuing in a lower voice. "But more importantly, you've just proven that individual innovation can still trump institutional thinking. You've shown that sometimes the best solution to an impossible problem is to redefine the problem entirely." Reyna nodded, not sure what response was expected. "That's why," Patterson continued, "I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross. And that's also why I'm assigning you to a new project that's going to require everything you learned today, and then some." The colonel handed her a manila envelope marked with classification stamps she'd never seen before. "Report to Building 7 Alpha at 800 tomorrow. Bring your rifle." As Patterson walked away, Reyna stood holding the envelope and wondering what new impossibilities it might contain. Around her, the celebration continued, but she was already thinking about tomorrow's challenges. The Barrett rifle had proven its worth today, but she had a feeling it was only the beginning of something much larger. The sun was setting over the Qatar desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded her of New Mexico sunsets from her childhood. But this evening felt different from any she'd experienced before. This evening, she was no longer just another pilot trying to prove herself in a man's world. This evening she was Viper, the woman who had changed air combat forever. The debriefing session in Building 7 Alpha lasted 6 hours. Reyna sat at a conference table facing a panel of officers whose ranks and specialties spanned the entire spectrum of military aviation. Generals, colonels, majors and civilian contractors with security clearances that allowed them to ask questions she couldn't answer in less classified settings. The questions came in waves, each more detailed than the last. Ballistic calculations, targeting methodologies, aircraft modifications, engagement geometry, psychological factors. Every aspect of the day's mission was dissected with surgical precision. Multiple cameras recorded every word, and stenographers transcribed every technical detail. Captain Castellanos, Brigadier General Rebecca Falcon Martinez leaned forward across the table, her dark eyes intense with interest. I want you to walk us through your decision-making process during the engagement with Bandit 4. What factors influenced your choice of target and timing? Reyna had answered variations of this question a dozen times already, but she understood the importance of precision. These officers weren't just satisfying curiosity. They were building doctrinal frameworks that would guide future training and operations. Ma'am, Bandit 4 was executing a classic boom and zoom attack profile on Warthog Lead's damaged aircraft. His flight path was predictable for approximately 8 seconds during the attack run, which provided the targeting window I needed. The range was optimal for the Barrett system, close enough for accuracy, far enough to minimize his ability to respond to muzzle flash. General Martinez made notes on a tablet before continuing. And your assessment of the psychological impact on the remaining enemy pilots? Significant, ma'am.